To fire up all across the internet, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. By the way, we're also streaming on Rumble now. So if you're not familiar with Rumble, it's a little bit of a competitor over to YouTube, and looks like we're alive over there. So if you're looking for another stream, then that's a good place. But it looks like we're alive on all of our different platforms. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney right here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. Throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today. We've got a lot to get into. We're going to be talking about the Andrew Brown Jr. shooting. We had spent some time talking about this. Remember, Ben Crump is representing this family, same attorney that was representing the George Floyd family back in the Derek Chauvin trial. So we have the North Carolina district attorney came out today, and he is telling us that the shooting was justified. And it wasn't just one shooting. We actually didn't know much about the incident with Andrew Brown, but we now have a little bit of body camera footage that came out from today's press briefing. And so we're going to show that to you. Now, the district attorney came back out and said, well, totally justified. So it wasn't just one shooting. Once we see the video, it was actually like 6 or 7 shootings, kind of a whole slurry of officers just hailing bullets into the back of Andrew Brown's vehicle. So that's going to be a fun one to analyze. We're going to go through that today. We've got several clips from that, mostly PG-13, nothing that I think would be in violation of any of YouTube's protocols, but just a content warning here at the start of the show that we are going to be talking about an officer-involved shooting involving Andrew Brown in the context of legal analysis and education. So just keep that in mind, little context check. Then we're going to change gears and talk about what's happening in the U.S. Supreme Court. Yesterday, we got a whole slew of orders that came down, some actually pretty important ones and some not so bad ones, really. We have Caniglia versus Strom, and we talked about this case at some point previously when we were talking about some of the Second Amendment analysis. If you recall, this was an elderly gentleman, got into an argument with his wife. Cops came. He had actually left the home. Cops came, basically entered his house, seized his guns, and they did it under this community caretaker exception. In other words, that the police are like, community caretakers. Hey, we're just here to help and serve you. Okay. So they come in, they take the gun, and they justify it on this exception to the Fourth Amendment. Well, the Supreme Court came out today and said, no, not so fast. Home is sacred. You don't just get to stamp all over the Fourth Amendment. So that's very good news. Another interesting case came out about unanimous verdicts, and we're going to update you on that. We have also some new information that the Supreme Court is going to be weighing back in on the Roe versus Wade debacle of a legal case. So that is coming back up here soon. So we got a lot of Supreme Court news that we're going to get to. Then we're going to talk about the woke military, because they are suiting up. And in fact, they're going to go out there and they're going to, protect America's national security interests. They are going to just put on all the gear that they need and go out and win the war for America. Who are they fighting? Oh, the climate change, Mother Earth. So that's great. So they're also going to be out there. Now the Army is indicating that there is sort of a climate change is a grave national security threat to the United States. We also are going to hear again from, or we're not going to hear from him, but he was on Sean Hannity, the former Space Force commander. Matthew Lohmeier was on Sean Hannity, have a couple of quotes from him. And then we now know that the Pentagon is going to be launching a pilot program to go and investigate military personnel, their social media. So if you are with the Army and let's say you get on Facebook and you say this kind of climate change initiative that we're doing is stupid, I thought I kind of joined up here to go out there and fight terrorism and sort of enemies of America, not change light bulbs and encourage people to switch to alternative vehicles. That didn't seem like a good idea. And so if you get on Facebook and you say that, well, the Pentagon, they're coming for your ass. That might be extremist material. And so they've got a pilot program to make sure that they can root out any of the detractors, any of the anti-climate people or any of the extremists that are within the ranks of the military, whatever that means. We know that, according to John Brennan, former CIA director, he said that even libertarians were very dangerous. So kind of a big bucket that they're defining there. So we've got a lot to get into. Before we do, want to give you a quick update. We got some YouTube news that I want to give you an update on. So if you'll notice, the name of this channel changed today. It went over from Robert Gruler Esq to Robert Gruler Esq Live, and we're going to be focusing on that on this channel, all the live stuff. So every day we're going to continue on doing the live show, and we're also going to clip it just like we've been doing. So really nothing's going to change here at all. The reason why we made that change is because I am starting a second channel, which is just going to be Robert Gruler Esq, because I have other things that I want to work on, other projects and other commentary that I want to make some videos about. And in fact, I did that. So there's a video over on the second channel, Robert Gruler Esq. The link is in the description below. And it is going to be premiering tomorrow at this time, because I'm not going to be here tomorrow at this time. I have a board meeting, a big, long board meeting that I have to go and attend over for the nonprofit that I'm a part of. It's called ericshouse.org. If you want to go and support that organization, that would mean the world to me. It's a nonprofit to help people who've lost somebody to suicide, addiction, or a tragic death like an overdose or a car accident, somebody who was sort of taken before their time. There's a lot of people out there who've lost somebody. They need some help and some support out there. So we've built a grieving community and a support group over at ericshouse.org. I've got a board meeting over there tomorrow. I got to bring this camera and all this gear over there. So I'm not going to be able to do the live show. So in lieu of a live show, we're going to be doing a premiere on the COVID article that was written by Nicholas Wade. And so if you want to check that out, it's going to be premiering tomorrow at the same time over on my separate channel, which is going to be devoted to that type of stuff. It's sort of recorded, long form, deep dive conversations, stuff that I really don't have the time or, the live format is awesome. I love it. It keeps me on my toes. It's something where I get to run through the news quickly. It forces me to prepare quickly, forces me to digest a lot of information in order to just sit down and talk here for about 90 minutes. But I also learn a ton from you. I mean, you guys ask great questions and I share links over at Locals. And so I'm just learning a lot. So this is not going to change. But there are some times when I want to just take a deep dive into something like the Nicholas Wade article. Very long article, very deep in depth. And so I spent about an hour and 20 minutes on video going through that. And I also have some video in there about my trip to Shanghai. I actually show you around the wet market that I went to with my mother and my stepfather, Greg, when we went back over there in 2015. So we're traveling around the wet market and we're kind of exploring the difference between two theories about where COVID came from, whether it came from a bat in a cave out in China, or whether this was something that may have been engineered through a gain of function research that was being promoted by Dr. Fauci through the NIH, through the NIAID, back through EcoHealth Alliance to Dr. Daszak, back over to Dr. Shi, the Wuhan bat lady who was at the Wuhan lab of virology in Wuhan, China. So we go through the whole narrative, and it's a very fascinating article. I'd encourage you to read the whole thing, but if you don't want to do that, no worries, because it's going to be premiering tomorrow at 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern on channel number 2, Robert Gruler Esq. So go and check that out. And we're going to be doing more of that stuff. There's going to be some times when I want to just take a real deep dive and I want to record it so I can be a little bit more intentional and not kind of just, swinging from the hip here, which is unfortunately sometimes what I do. But we're having fun, right? It's part of the fun is we're kind of going through this together spontaneously and having a conversation. The second channel is going to be for something just a little bit different. So I'd love your support. If it sounds like, you want to go check out some of that content, please go ahead and do that. And if you're a local subscriber, by the way, it's already available. So I already posted that little bit of a, sneak preview. It's actually what do they call that? The opening, whatever. I don't know what it is. I don't watch a lot of movies, but that's happening now over at Locals. So if you want to support the show, that's really the place to do it. It's at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And there you can watch the premiere that's going to be happening tomorrow. You can also, get the other clips that I post regularly. We have a copy of my book you can download. All of the slides that we're about to go through right now, those are available for download as well. And there's really great people, and they're doing a lot of cool stuff over at Locals. So I love the support. watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And that's about it. So that's it for the intro. Long introduction. Thanks for indulging me on that. A little bit of a channel update, but I just wanted to clear the air on that so you knew what was going on. Nothing really is changing here, but we are just going to be creating some new content over on channel number 2, and I would love your support over there. All right, so let's get into the news. Andrew Brown Jr., this was a man who was shot and killed some time ago in April. And for a while, we've been wondering what really happened here, because there was absolutely body camera footage that the police had, but they just had not disclosed it. And so we've been following this case for some time because Ben Crump, the attorney who represented the George Floyd family in the Derek Chauvin case, is representing the Andrew Brown Jr. family. And on this channel, we talked about this. This one felt like it may have been very bad because there was already a lot of concerns in North Carolina that they were going to be bracing for impact, bracing for protests and riots and a lot of unrest. And the judge out of there actually said that a lot of this body camera video could not come out because they were going to be making charging decisions. And there was a lot of back and forth about this. So the public, you and I were kind of scratching our heads saying, well, what happened here? This is part of what we want. We want accountability. We want transparency. We don't like it when the government just takes the evidence, any evidence of their malfeasance, and they sit on it. They put it under their chair and nobody ever sees it. That's a huge problem. But then conversely to that, you say, well, what if we do release it? Then we end up with a situation like we had with Derek Chauvin, where the media is doing a dog pile, where we have Maxine Waters, parachuting in while everybody's, sort of steamrolling for one particular outcome. And it's almost impossible to get a fair and impartial trial. And so you're kind of stuck between this rock and a hard place. And they did it a little bit differently here in North Carolina. And so we have the district attorney, goes by the name of Andrew Womble. He came out today and said that the actions of the deputies in the shooting of Andrew Brown were, quote, justified. So it doesn't look like we're going to be getting any charges from him. Now, he was killed on April 21st, and Andrew Womble said on Tuesday that the deputies were, in fact, justified. He said, quote, Mr. Brown's death, while tragic, was justified because Mr. Brown's action caused 3 deputies. So let's follow this closely because we're going to watch the video here in a minute. He said it caused 3 deputies with the county sheriff's office to reasonably believe it was necessary to do what? To use deadly force to protect themselves and others. Okay, this is going to be a big one. And others. See that? Because we're going to watch the video and you can tell me whether you think that 3 deputies were really reasonably believing that it was necessary to use deadly force to protect themselves. Okay, we're going to watch and you can see if you can see whether 3 people thought that was reasonably necessary. Now, others, we're going to see, yeah, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Because now, if the officers are not in direct threat, well, they can say that they can do this they can shoot and kill somebody to stop that person from theoretically or potentially killing somebody else down the road. Now, I want you to compare and contrast this with Kim Potter. Okay, Kim Potter, if you recall, another kind of a roadside shooting. So with Andrew Brown, let me just frame this out a little bit. We're going to see a situation where he's in the car. We don't actually see much of him at all. He's in the vehicle. This was played today during the press conference. And he's sort of trying to get away from the cops. They're on foot and they're surrounding him. And so as he is leaving, one of the cops is saying, well, no, he could have hit us with the car. That's what justifies the lethal force. That's a vehicle. A vehicle can be a lethal weapon. We all know that. And the cops knew that too. And so if he is trying to hit an officer, certainly that's lethal force. Well, what about the Kim Potter case? Right? What now the Kim Potter case was similar. And so the theory, the defense there was that for her, the defense would be that she could have shot him because Dante Wright was fleeing in a vehicle. And if that vehicle got away from him, or if he was, on a long, dangerous chase with the police running after him, he could have gone over the barrier. He could have hit somebody else. He could have killed somebody. He could have killed his girlfriend in the car. So the shooting, the defense goes, would have been justified in order to protect the life of another. Same type of defense that is happening here. Now, Kim Potter, the prosecution didn't charge her with that because she thought it was a taser. It was a lot more obviously a mistake. But here, right, the prosecution looked at this case and said no charges are warranted. We think that this was a totally justified shooting because of this others. I think you're going to really see what I mean when we get to it. So Womble said that the total time the deputies interacted with Brown from the moment they jumped out of the truck to the moment they pulled Brown's body out of the crashed vehicle was only 44 seconds. Womble showed 4 different body camera videos from the deputies during those 44 seconds. The video shows the deputies jumping out of the back of their truck, running at Brown's vehicle, cursing and pointing guns at him. Brown begins reversing his vehicle away from the deputies, according to Womble, to the back of his vehicle was blocked by his home. At this point, Brown begins driving forward towards the deputies who had surrounded his vehicle. As Brown's car begins going forward, one deputy is forced to sidestep the vehicle to avoid being hit. Okay, so you notice here from Womble's statement, he says it caused 3 deputies to reasonably believe it was necessary to use deadly force to protect themselves and others. All right, so the video, we see one officer, one deputy sort of jump out of the way. Brown's precise speed in attempting to flee and striking Deputy Lunsford is uncertain. but that he drove recklessly and endangered the officers is not uncertain. Therefore, I find that Brown's actions and conduct were indeed dangerous by the time of the shooting, said Womble. We're going to go through this. According to Womble, the first shot was fired by the deputies, entered the front windshield of Brown's car. And again, you're going to notice this. The car is here. There's officers all around the vehicle. And so Brown is going forward towards one direction. There's an officer up front here. So if at that moment in time, if he shoots through the windshield and he is in this is the front of the car going in his direction, it could theoretically hit him. So if he is shooting at that moment, that sounds like it might be justified force because there is a direct threat. As soon as he steps out of the way, and as soon as Andrew Brown's vehicle sort of, goes away from them and there's no other officer in that line of sight, in the direction, in the potential path of the vehicle, then are they in danger anymore? Themselves. Well, you can see for yourself. But the next question is then, what about other people? What about Andrew Brown fleeing? Now other people could theoretically be in danger. Several more shots are fired through the passenger and the rear passenger door. So the first shot went through the front windshield. Several more shots went through the passenger door and the rear passenger door and window. Okay, so as he's driving away, they just keep firing. Finally, as Brown drives off, more shots are fired through the back of the car. Brown's car travels a short distance, crashes into a tree. The same deputies who shot him run to the crash site, remove his body from the vehicle. Womble, the district attorney, said, I find that the facts of this case clearly illustrate that the officers who used deadly force on Andrew Brown did so reasonably and only when a violent felon used a deadly weapon in the car to place their lives in danger. Okay, lives, plural. Womble went on to say that the law does not require the danger to law enforcement to be actual. As long as the danger is apparent, it can justify the use of force. If a cop just thinks it looks like, apparently that might be dangerous, that's enough. Although Womble believes the deputies face both apparent and actual danger during their interaction with Brown. The Constitution does not require police to gamble with their lives in the face of a serious threat of harm. Well, it also doesn't say that you can just shoot people either. So keep that in mind there, Mr. Prosecutor. Investigators did not find a weapon in Brown's vehicle. No weapon. Womble said the official autopsy has not been finalized, but okay. The preliminary results from the medical examiner's office show he suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to the right shoulder, all right? And so we know that one went through the front windshield. Did that one hit him in the right shoulder? We don't know. And one to the back of the head. Well, that's okay. So if you're shooting somebody and the bullet goes in the back of the head, that must mean that they are, going away from you. Cause of death appears to be multiple gunshot wounds. No kidding. The autopsy also found a substance consistent with crystal meth found in Brown's mouth at the time of his death. Autopsy, the PC, the company that the family hired to perform an independent autopsy, said he was shot 4 times in the right arm and then once fatally in the back of the head. Okay, so we'll see where that bullet came from, the back of the head bullet. Here we have the district attorney. Let's listen in.
On Wednesday, April 21st, 2021, Andrew Brown Jr. of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, was shot and killed by 3 deputies with the Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office. This incident occurred at the residence of Mr. Brown, located at 421 Perry Street in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. After reviewing the investigation conducted by the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Brown's death, while tragic, was justified because Mr. Brown's actions caused 3 deputies with the Pasquotank County Sheriff's Office to reasonably believe it was necessary to use deadly force to protect themselves and others. While the officer-involved shooting that resulted in the death of Andrew Brown occurred on Wednesday, April 21st, law enforcement involvement with Mr. Brown began in the weeks prior and put the wheels in motion that eventually led to the attempted service of arrest and search warrants on April 21, 2021. In the early months of this year, Detective Johnson with the Dare County Sheriff's Office received information from a reliable confidential source that Andrew Brown Jr. from Elizabeth City was selling drugs in Dare County. Detective Johnson contacted Pasquotank County and confirmed Mr. Brown's identity and that he is a known drug dealer. Upon learning this information, Detective Johnson, with the aid of the confidential informant, made 2 undercover buys from Brown on March 17th, 2021 and March 29th, 2021. Those buys were of cocaine and heroin, respectively. A later SBI lab analysis determined that the heroin was laced with fentanyl. Subsequently, arrest warrants were issued for Brown's arrest on April 20th, 2021.
So a lot of political pressure on this gentleman to go, one of a whole slew of different ways. And, this is something that happens with prosecutors very regularly, right? They make charging decisions. Sometimes people will even hire us before they make their decision to see if we can get in there and negotiate these things away. See if we can maybe come to a resolution before the case gets out of control. And so right now, they're sort of going through this process where the district attorney is now analyzing the facts and making a decision about what he believes. Can I go and file charges based on what I've reviewed? So prosecution offices, they have the ability to just go and file complaints on their own. This happens all the time. This happens even in like misdemeanor cases, okay? When a cop pulls you over and cites you for a DUI, well, the cop identified probable cause. He turns that into the prosecution, and that's really it turns that into the court, and that's kind of a complaint. That's the government initiating a criminal case against you through a direct complaint procedure. But there's another way that you can do this. You can go through a grand jury proceeding as well. Remember, we saw this back with the Breonna Taylor case. With Breonna Taylor, we had the attorney general out of that city go through the grand jury indictment process, and lo and behold, guess what? Those cops weren't charged with anything either. Isn't that convenient? Then we heard that some of the grand jurors, the people who were there making the decision. So let me back this up a little bit. I got ahead of myself. On the first part of this analysis, you have the prosecution who gets to decide whether there's enough cause to bring criminal charges. And this is what happened right here. This district attorney I analyzed it and I said, nothing here, not sufficient. The other way you can do that is by going through a grand jury. They also have the ability to say, well, we viewed the facts, we viewed the law, and we decided that we think that there is enough here to go and charge somebody with a crime. And when you have kind of a conflict of interest, it makes a lot of sense to go that route. And we saw that in the Breonna Taylor case. We saw Daniel Cameron presented something to the grand jurors, and all this takes place in secret, right? It's all really, really kept quiet for a reason. There's good reasons for that. They came back and said, nope, no cause there to charge Mattingly and the other Breonna Taylor officers. But then shortly thereafter, some of the grand jurors came out and said, well, they kind of presented like half the story. If they would have told us these other things, maybe in fact, we would have charged those other officers. But in this case, they didn't really go that route. They just gave it to the district attorney. He leans on it. No, it doesn't look good. Probably got the governor coming in, police union over here. You've got, a lot of people who are making this presentation, this press conference, go a certain way, right? There's a political component to this. You'd have to be insane to think that they're not talking about that because they just saw what Minneapolis went through for a year, right? And so you've got all of these government people going, we don't want to go through that. Maybe that's a big reason why they didn't release some of this video. And what would have happened if they would have released the video, the video that I'm about to show you? What if they would have released this, let's say 6 months ago? Would the charging decisions have been different because of the fact that there was public pressure placed down upon the government to do something about this? Now what we have is now they're coming out. They say, hey, we're not going to make a charge. We're going to make a charging decision not to charge here today. And here's the video that we made it about. So if you have anything to say about that, if you're upset about this, if you think we should have charged, it's too late. We already made our decision. So don't bring it up. Now, what if we flip that? What if we released the video 6 months ago? The public sees it. You have a lot of these interest groups, BLM, whatever, sort of organizing, then laying pressure to bear, organizing campaigns, GoFundMes, whatever, so that they can create pressure on the district attorney. Would the charging decision have changed? And we got to be asking ourselves this. How are our courts going to navigate this? Because it's going to happen again. Are we going to go through the Derek Chauvin model, or are we going to go through the Andrew Brown model, where we have almost no information until we get a charging decision? Going to be very interesting, right? And I am very in favor of accountability and transparency, but also in favor of due process and the presumption of innocence. And so we've got a very, very tricky balancing test that we're going to have to continue to stay focused on. So this is the video of the Andrew Brown shooting, and I want to show you this. Now, content warning, right? This is a police interaction. We don't see any blood. We don't hear anybody die. We don't see any dead bodies, nothing like that. But you are going to hear and see some officers surrounding a vehicle. And of course, they are firing bullets into the vehicle. It's not a long video, and I want you to notice, we're going to watch this probably a couple times. Let's watch this first, and then we'll go back and watch it again.
See your head! Let me see your head! Hey! Hey! me see your hands! Show me your hands! Get EMS!
All right, so he's yelling, get EMS, get EMS. He's already been shot, probably, bleeding out right there. So not a good situation. But the question is, was it a clean shoot, right? Did the officers, were they justified in this shooting? And I'll tell you this, there's a lot of officers shooting in the back of a vehicle. So what's their justification for that? Well, the justification is this was a dangerous person. They were trying to execute a warrant and he was fleeing. He could have been a danger to other people in the community. And so they needed to shoot him in order to stop that potential. But let's watch this one more time. We're going to see that officer step out of the way so his car backs up. And there's no officer behind him, right? And so that officer, I don't think we can say was in danger. Then he pulls forward again, but he stops. There's another officer right in front who is sidestepping out of the way. So we're going to watch that quickly. I think at that moment in time, once you know the vehicle is in drive and it's going forward, you've got another officer in front of the vehicle. He's in the direct line of sight. I think at that moment in time, yes, you could have shot in order to stop this individual, because at that moment he is going forward. He is in a vehicle. If he continues to go forward, you don't know whether he's going to run over that officer or not. But as soon as that officer steps out of the way, well, he's no longer in harm's way. And you're going to see that because he sort of steps in line with the vehicle. So in other words, Andrew Brown could not have gone into the officers because he would have also crashed into a vehicle. If he was trying to escape, as he clearly was, then he would have had to turn another direction and then escape across that grassy knoll there. And he did that. Then officers unloaded into the back of his vehicle. And we know that probably the lethal shot was one of those bullets, one of the bullets that went into the back of his head. So the question then at that point in time, was he still a threat when that bullet went into the back of his head? Did the cops, were they allowed to use lethal force at that moment in time? Well, this district attorney said, yeah, absolutely they could. Let's watch this one more time. Okay, so right here, we're going to see, let's play it a little bit further. All right, so yeah, we got one officer there as he's backing up. Then he puts it in drive. We've got this officer here. He's outside of the line of sight, right? He's over there. Now this officer right there. Yeah, and then at that point, basically the rest is over. What do you think? Clean, not clean, justified, not justified? Let me know in the comments. We're going to go through, we're going to read some quick follow-up on this from the New York Times, and then let me know what you think in the comments. We're going to take your questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. So the prosecutor, again, as we know, said it was justified. He said that he made this announcement. They were attempting, what started this? They said that they were Pasquotank County Sheriff's deputies. They were trying to serve a drug-related warrant. That was the whole basis. So again, drugs, right? We're going to go get him for drugs. He ends up dead. 3 deputies opened fire. Private autopsy said he was hit by 5 bullets, killed by a shot to the back of the head. So we already know there was a 1 bullet at least to the shoulder, maybe 3 other to the arm, and then that would be 4, so 1 to the back of the head. Brown's family and their lawyers said it was an execution. We saw that from Ben Crump when he came out recently. Womble said that at one point he drove his car directly at one deputy. That was a deputy who sort of sidestepped. Governor Roy Cooper, a Democrat, asked Womble to turn the case over to a special prosecutor, as have lawyers for the Brown family. The death of Mr. Brown was on a quiet residential street just shortly after the Chauvin trial. Lawyer for the deputies said the killing was justified. Mr. Womble, in an earlier court hearing, said the body and dash cam video of the incident showed that Mr. Brown made contact with the deputies with his car, and the officers opened fire thereafter. But the prosecutor's version of what the body camera footage shows is starkly different than the description offered by Brown's family and 2 members of their legal team who have been given 2 occasions to see some of the footage. A local judge delayed the public release of the videos. We talked about that, citing concerns that their release could compromise the investigation. The decision angered demonstrators and family members who said the public should have the right to see their recordings and decide for themselves whether the shooting was justified. They showed portions of the video on Tuesday, but Mr. Womble said that they are not going to release the full footage. So why not then, right? If you're not going to charge, then why don't you release everything? If you've already made your decision, let us vet your work. Let us see it. You saw everything and you came to a conclusion. Where's the rest of it then? Give it all out to us. You're not going to charge him. We already know that. So what's the harm? Other than the fact that a bunch of people are going to be pissed off and you're not going to get reelected. How about that? So our first questions come over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Look at these two links. You can go check these links out. I also want to plug Rumble a little bit. If you'll notice, if you don't know what's going on with the YouTube drama right now, Steven Crowder is right in the middle of it with YouTube. And so he is moving over to Rumble. And so if you're going to go over there to subscribe to him, maybe you should give us a little follow. Also, that's the link, rumble.com/c/Robert Gruler Esq. We'd appreciate that. What's up? Pinky2 is in the house over at Locals. Says, do officers start shooting and being in that process continue shooting when danger is over? But they started it, so they have the mindset to finish it. Selling drugs is bad, but does a human need to die for it? Saying the mindset of the officers being this guy is really dangerous for selling harmful drugs. If they get a reason, take the guy out. Yeah, Pinky, you know, kind of yes, right? If you're going to draw your firearm and use lethal force, you want to make sure that person dies, right? And this is why we all sort of make fun of the people who say, oh, just shoot him in the leg. So, why? So he just bleeds out there in pain and agony? He's going to die a slow death, right? We just shoot him one time and watch him just writher in pain for 4 minutes and die anyways? Or you just, you know, you're using lethal force. So the concept, as awful as it is you have to eliminate the threat, right? You got to end that person's life immediately, quickly, decisively, and without any hesitation. That's the whole point of it. And then in this case, right, sort of that same concept, but then they go, oh, shoot, he's driving away now. I guess we'll just keep going, pop, until he's done, right? Then he stops. Oh, got him. So we're going to go run over there and see if we can figure out what happened. Then he calls EMS after the guy's, you know, got a bullet in the back of his head. So yeah, drugs, all over drugs. Be Brave says, I read somewhere that this state law requires a court order to release body cam footage. Sorry, don't have the receipts at the moment. You're right, actually. We did cover that. That judge had the authority to release it publicly and decided not to do that, which was a little bit different than I think every other state here. So it was different. And we were all sort of expecting the judge to just go, all right, you know, it's a formality. I reviewed it. In the interest of accountability and transparency, we'll get that stuff out for you. The judge didn't. We were all going, what? All right. But at the same time, when you sort of juxtapose this with the Chauvin trial, you kind of have sympathies for the judge, because did Chauvin get a fair trial after all this came out? Not really. We have Kelly D. Stu is in the house. What's up, Kelly? Says, couldn't they just take the tires out? Yeah, just shoot him in the leg. Why did they? Somebody should have just asked Joe Biden where to shoot him. E. Dantes says, as you and I have discussed on comments before, when officers assess threats, it is a continuum, and it is not a clearly delineated on and off. Yeah, right. I would agree with that. Right. And we've seen that. We've seen that in the different charts. It sort of, it can scale up. It can ramp up really quickly, and it can ramp back down really quickly. It's not like, oh, you get to use lethal force, and then it's just whatever you want to do. It's just lethal force indefinitely. Right. So like, let's say that guy threatened an officer with deadly force, and then that moment of the deadly force subsided because he's running away. Well, you don't get to, because on minute 1, because he pointed a gun at you, on minute 4, you don't get to shoot him when he's running away and he's no longer a threat. Now at minute 1, you could have, because at that moment he was a threat, but the continuum changes. The situations are dynamic, and so the ability at that moment to continue to use lethal force dissipates because it has to be relative to the threat. We have, good to see you, Edantes. Josh Sesko is in the house. What's up, Josh? Says, in my opinion, the cops were more than justified. If anything, they waited too long to shoot. Josh. All right. Hey, it's an opinion. I appreciate you being here. We have Pinky2 says, I think it's questionable. And I lean toward he was driving where he could have hit 1 or 2 officers, but unloading after is questionable to me. I think so too, Pinky. I think that's, a kind of a reasonable, breakdown. When he's going at that officer, I think shooting at that moment is okay. When he's driving away and bullets are coming in the back of his windshield, that looks like something from a Hollywood movie, not anything that resembles law enforcement. Sharon Quidney says, so here's another person killed on account of drugs. Looks to me like the imminent danger had passed, but if the officer thought the suspect had weapons, etc., one way or the others, the drug wars need to end. Yeah, I agree with that. Totally agree with that. We have Tree Mendes is in the house. Says, my question would be, what is the training? If they're following the training and the rules, it's justified, but perhaps there should be an adjustment to the rules. Good to see you, Tremendous. Yeah, I don't know. There are probably a lot of documents that we'll never see related to this inquiry, but I really doubt that the district attorney is going to tell us much of anything. We have Davis Parks here, says, I understand the first few shots. Yeah, I agree. But shouldn't police cease firing when the car is no longer heading toward people? Just because you can shoot doesn't mean you should. I think they'd at least charge the officers for shooting at the end. Yeah, and then, that sort of protection of others argument, right? The argument there is if you're shooting because he's theoretically a danger to anybody else out there in society, if he gets away, he could crash into that house, or he could run over the kid playing football down the street, or whatever. But so does firing massive amounts of ammunition sort of haphazardly down a neighborhood. Okay, you had 6 officers there with ARs or whatever, semi-automatics, just unloading ammunition downrange at the back of that guy's car. You don't know what's on the other side of that. He was near that house. There was a tree over there. It was a lot of shooting, right? So officers shouldn't be doing reckless things either. We have Texas Island Girl says, can you argue that he is a danger to others other than the officers when he starts driving into people's front yards? Yeah, I think so. And I think that's exactly sort of what the district attorney was saying. He kind of latched onto that others, right? Because you could maybe at one point during that drive away, he was in fact a threat to 1 or 2 officers. But as soon as he turned, can you really make that argument anymore? Now it's just a pursuit, right? It's a vehicle pursuit, and we've done many of those. But when you say that, yes, he can continue to be a threat to other people because he could have hit the kid playing soccer or the mom walking the dog or whatever, then yeah, maybe you can extend that. Now, I'm not so sure that I'm comfortable with that, because where do you draw the line? At what point does somebody start being a threat to others and stop being a threat to others? Because theoretically, anything that anybody does at any time could be a threat to others. The question is, will it become that or not? And when that change happens, does that justify the use of lethal force? Chairman of board says, all legalities aside, if you're surrounded by police with guns telling you to stop and you choose to try to speed away and don't seem to care if you run them over in the process, the expectation should be that you'll be shot. It's a horrible situation, but I have no problem with someone that puts themselves in that situation being shot. This is actually a very common position. And, a lot of people, I think, subscribe to this, Chairman. I've heard this from other commenters, right? Saying basically, if you are not following commands of police, anything that happens to you is on you, right? Because we know that police have authority. Everybody in our society should, have some concept of that. And if you are putting yourself in danger, if you're going to basically be, defying a direct order from law enforcement, then you're opening the door. You're opening that can of worms, and anything that bad happens as a result of that is on you. So, it's a valid interpretation or a analytical framework for these types of incidents. And I think, Chairman, you're sort of defaulting towards siding with law enforcement, which is a perfectly valid position. I don't, right? I typically side opposite of that. But, many people agree with you, and they say that this should be the standard. The line should be follow the orders, follow the commands. Good opinion. Thanks for jumping that in there. We have Jeremy Matrita says they can't release the full video because we at watchingthewatchers.locals.com determine the media and the public aren't capable of refraining from trying officers in the court of public opinion. Yeah. And so you're sort of, Jeremy sort of, calling out this idea that if this stuff is released, it turns into something where the media is making it so it's impossible to have a fair and impartial trial. And in other words, the information needs to be kept behind closed doors in order to ensure that we have some impartiality. We have Besamiento says, it looks like he was trying to run an officer over. Officers have every right to shoot. Why do criminals run? Stupid and deadly. From Besamiento. I think a lot of it has to do with sort of, cultural differences. And, there are some people in our society that just have a different experience with law enforcement, and there's, I think, a lot of valid questions about that. What can we do about that, right? If we're going to be, if we're going to be saying that law enforcement is a part of this problem, if they're a part of this justice reform issue, BLM wants to literally defund the police. Okay, so they're identifying the police as a part of the problem. I know many people don't agree with that premise, but let's just say that we follow that premise. Police are at least a part of the equation. unless they are 100% of the equation, well, we have the other part of the equation that we have to talk about, right? It's about society, and it's about how we respond with law enforcement, and it's about how we train our children and what we teach in our schools and how we educate people about our justice system in popular culture and in movies and TVs and how all this stuff works, because we're all supposed to be a society and we want it to be functional. And so when we have, a law enforcement mechanism, when we have a process in place for doing policing in our society, and there's one area where it just doesn't work very well, it's worth asking ourselves, why is that? And if you say, if you start going down this road, you say, well, maybe the people who are responding to law enforcement are also contributing to the breakdown. We have a breakdown here. We have two sides that are supposed to be, interfacing with one another, not doing a good job of it. This is a breakdown. How do we fix this? We identify where the rub is. But if you start asking that question, hey, maybe they shouldn't run. Maybe these criminals shouldn't flee. Maybe, whatever. You start getting into dicey territory. Now it's because of your white privilege. It's because of your, male patriarchy, whatever you want to say, that you don't understand the plight of that demographic. And I think that there is some truth to that. I think that it is impossible to know and experience and understand what every single person in the world feels about life or society on any given day. And so it's part of the human experience is to have these conversations and to try to get to the bottom of it. Unfortunately, there are some questions that you just can't ask anymore because you're going to be labeled a racist or a xenophobe or a bigot or any of those things. So, ultimately, if we're going to have a real solution, we got to have real conversations, which is why I'm so grateful that you are here with me on this channel. All right, let's continue on. We have Jeremy Matrita says, unless there is a designated officer to call a ceasefire, everyone will keep firing because other officers are firing. In my opinion, it's like an applause cycle. Not that I equate the shooting to applause. Hopefully that makes sense, right? It's like, yes, it's sort of once the floodgates open, everything continues on. We have Pinky2 in the house, says, Rob, I get it. He made some real obvious danger moves to the police. If he took that leap, he is a danger. Great comments. Thank you for all of those from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Thank you for your support over there. All right, we're going to change gears. Supreme Court is back in the news. We had a long list of new orders come out yesterday. I want to show you a quick screenshot of one that we're going to get into here quickly. This is the Edward versus Strom case. Edward Caniglia versus Strom. This is from the petition for certiorari, the brief for the petitioner. And this is a case where Edward Caniglia was sort of in an altercation with his wife. Cops came after the fact, and they ended up going into his house and essentially taking his guns away. The question then was, were they allowed to do that? Were they allowed to go into the house? And if so, under what principle? What authority did they have to do that? Because we all know that the Fourth Amendment says that your right to be, free from unlawful, unreasonable searches and seizures in your home. We're supposed to be protected in our homes. Cops are supposed to get warrants or ask your permission or identify some exigent circumstances that allow them to get into your home. A lot of case law. Supreme Court has said the home is sacred. So when these police in the Caniglia case went into his house and kind of took his gun away, what basis did they have to do that? What was their justification for that? Well, they leaned on this concept called community caretaking. It's this exception that some circuits, I lost my train of thought there. Some circuits in the United States, we have different circuits of federal courts that tell us how the law works in that particular circuit. I'm going to tell you what that means here in a minute. But in this case, in this circuit, in this location, they said that a police officer can go into your house and they can use this community caretaking exception to do so. They don't need a warrant. They don't need exigent circumstances. If they have a kind of a good reason to do so and it's under the community caretaker, I'm just part of the community, I'm just here to caretake, then you can come on into the house. This is something that has existed for vehicles, right? Prosecutors and police use this all the time for vehicles. They say, well, we're just going to pull you over as part of our community caretaking exception. You didn't do anything wrong, really, but we're just going to try to stop you and sort of investigate it because we're just taking care of the community. And the courts have said that's no problem at all. So now the question was, does that doctrine extend into the home? Big question. And people like me, civil people interested in civil liberties and the Constitution and sort of the concerns that we have over an over-encroaching government, we were all on high alert over this case, because if this were to have gone the other way, then basically the cops could have just said, well, whatever, we can just, the same reasons that we can pull you over, we can get into your house. Oof, scary stuff. this is what the question was. Certiorari was granted last year, November 20th, 2020. The question was whether the community caretaking exception to the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement extends to the home. So can they use this exception to get into your house? This is how the circuit was split previously. So the question was, does the community caretaker exception extend to the home? There were many circuits that said, yeah, it does. First Circuit said, yep, no problem. Fifth Circuit said, yep, they can come on in, invite them for dinner. Eighth Circuit also said, yeah, cops are very welcome. Third Circuit, Seventh Circuit, Ninth Circuit, and 10th Circuit, they all said no. No, we're not going to allow that to happen. And so we had a couple circuits that just didn't give us any answers. Second Circuit, no answers. Fourth, no answers. Sixth, no answers. And so the Supreme Court came in and they said, well, we got to clear this up. We have a circuit split. You can see that these circuits sort of break up the country, right? So if we have 1, 5, and 8, we have 1 over here, we have 5 down here, and we have 8 over here. So we got North Dakota, sort of the Midwest, we got Texas, and some of these southern states, and then we have the Northeast all saying cops can come on in, no problem. Then we have the others saying no. We got the 3rd, 7th, 9th, and 10th. So we got the 3rd over here, 7th here, 9th, and then the 10th. So the good western part of the country saying no to the police, Chicagoland, and some of New York and Pennsylvania, that circuit here, all saying cops cannot come in. So this case came down, and it was in fact unanimous. That means all the judges voted in favor of making sure that this does not stand. You're going to see here the vote by ideology going from the left to the right. So from liberal to conservative, we got Sotomayor, Kagan, it goes all the way down to Thomas, every single one of them, including the new Amy Coney Barrett. We have Chief Justice Roberts, who's perfectly right there in the middle, which is a good place for him. And they all voted. Nope, doesn't apply. They cannot get into your home using the caretaker exception. Very, very good news. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. It was a unanimous ruling and a reminder that there is, in fact, no place like home. Monday, Supreme Court released their opinion, unanimously held the lower court's community caretaking exception into the home. They say that defied logic, and it defied the holding of Katie, as well as it violated the Fourth Amendment warrant requirement. With the court's unanimity, the home remains the most sacred space under the Fourth Amendment. Its sanctity literally houses its privilege. Without a warrant, without exigency, or without consent, the government search and seizure within it is unconstitutional. So it's very good news. This happened back during an argument with Caniglia. He offered her one of his unloaded guns. We're not going to read through all this. This is what. So there was an argument. This is kind of an elderly couple from my reading of it. Get into an argument, husband and wife. He says, well, how about I just shoot myself? Or how about I just kill myself, right? Takes a gun. I think it's unloaded, slams it down there. Wife freaks out. So he slams the gun down. He leaves, goes to a hotel. She calls the cops. Cops come back. They do a wellness check. And basically, he talks to the police and says, I'll leave. I'll go to a mental wellness evaluation, but only if you don't take my guns and take anything that's in my house. Well, guess what? They did. They took it all. And so he ended up suing them, and he won big time. So that's good news. Court's opinion was written by Judge Clarence Thomas, was devoid of the fearsome, compelling specter raised in the briefing and during an argument regarding the potential for troubling eventualities. As always with Realty, Court's Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, location matters. They say the location of the warrantless search and seizure. Government searches of vehicles regularly occur via exceptions. They say under the caretaking exception under Katie is not carte blanche for police to seize or search within the home. Very good. Police may engage in civic community caretaking functions. Didn't move the court. The court vacated the First Circuit's judgment, sent the case back to the lower court for further proceedings. Chief Justice Roberts, Alito, Justice Kavanaugh each wrote a brief concurring opinions to clarify what they described as the limits of the court's ruling. So good news. Typically conservative judges are very pro-police, right? And this has been something that I've been very critical of that for a long time. I don't know why. They are very protective or concerned about an over-encroaching big government unless it's law enforcement. Then the cops are just without fault, no matter what they do. So that has largely been how conservative jurisprudence has been, but not here. Can't go in your home. Very good news. Very good outcome. Glad it went that way. We also have another slight-ish criminal. Yeah, this is a criminal law case we have here. This says justices are divided on retroactive application of the jury unanimity rule. So we have a rule now that came out from the Supreme Court back in 2020. Let me show you this. Supreme Court in 2020 said criminal juries must be unanimous in order to convict. So they ruled this back April 20th, 2020. They said that juries in a state criminal trial must be unanimous to convict a defendant, settling a quirk of constitutional law that has allowed divided votes to result in convictions in Louisiana and Oregon. And so they went through this. They said Neil Gorsuch wrote that the practice is inconsistent with the right to a jury trial. It should be discarded as a vestige of Jim Crow laws. It was basically, sort of birthed out of bigotry and racism. Basically what was happening out of, Louisiana and some of these places is that back in the 1930s and since Oregon in 1930s, but they would, they would charge somebody, let's say a black guy, with a crime, right? And they'd have a jury, 12 people would be on there. Well, 10 people would be white, 2 people would be black, and the black people would say, well, no, we're not going to convict this person. So what do you have? Well, if you have a unanimous requirement for a verdict, well, that person doesn't get convicted. So a lot of these legislatures said, oh, it's fine. We'll just say it doesn't have to be unanimous anymore. So if it's 10-2, well, that's fine. So then you get enough room there that you can get some unfavorable jurors on there. Absolutely insane to me that this was even ever allowed to happen. I mean, we have a concept in our jurisprudence here called beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you have a split jury, kind of sounds like the definition of reasonable doubt to me, right? You got 2 jurors who say, I don't see it. It's the definition of it. But a lot of these states for some time were saying, yeah, you could, no problem, right? If you have 2 people who say not guilty, doesn't matter. You need 3. For a defense attorney, it's like the worst nightmare. You might as well not even try because it's just ridiculous. So now we know that in 2020, the Supreme Court said, can't do that anymore. And to be fair, most states around the country never sort of ascribed to this type of modality, but it was still something that was floating around in our jurisprudence for some time. Well, that happened in 2020. So the question was, well, what about the people who had already been convicted? What about if I was convicted in 2019 and I had a split jury conviction? They came out, 2 people said I was not guilty. Can I apply that 2020 case to my case that was in 2019? Maybe reopen it, get a new trial, have them dismiss my case. What's going on? Can I try again? Because you just came out and said, this is a problem. This is a vestige of Jim Crow. So I want another crack at it. Can I do it? The court said, no, you can't. Sorry. No retroactive application. They ruled, of course, in a vote of 6-3, purely political again. So all the conservative judges voting in favor of not extending that rule. All of the liberal judges voting in favor of extending it, so making it retroactive, which, of course, I would have loved to have seen it be made retroactive, but I wouldn't have held my breath that was going to happen. The geographical impact of the decision is limited to Louisiana and Oregon, the only 2 states that have allowed non-unanimous verdicts. So the dispute over this goes back almost 50 years. There was a 1972 ruling in Apodaca versus Oregon holding that although the 6th Amendment guarantees a right to a unanimous jury in federal cases, but that does not apply in state cases. So the justices were deeply divided in reaching that conclusion. 4 of them would have ruled. All right, it goes on and on and on. We know what the verdict is here, so it's not going to go backwards. We have in 2020, Ramos, we already talked about that case. It was a 6-3 case. The court's ruling drew a sharp dissent from Justice Elena Kagan, who is this judge right here. So Judge Elena Kagan, we have a majority opinion coming from these conservative judges. Judge Kagan wrote a dissent. Let's see what that says. She said here, Kagan suggested that the jury unanimity requirement was so clearly a watershed rule that the majority was left with little choice other than to scrap the watershed exception altogether, and it did so. Kagan contended, even though no one had asked it to do so, and without any good reason to do so, the majority, Kagan said, crawls under rather than leaps over the bar created by the principle that the court should normally adhere to its prior precedent. All right, so she's upset over some precedential stuff. It sounds like the Supreme Court is also going to be hearing a challenge to Roe versus Wade, and this is going to be interesting. This is, we're going to see when this actually hits the court docket. I'm very curious about this. Think about the timing now on all of this happening, and I haven't really thought through the timing on this specifically. Like, I don't know the dates and when this is all going to unfold, but I want you to think about this in terms of practicality. Okay, Roe versus Wade is one of the most contentious cases ever in the history of anything. And it is something that has become even bigger than really the legal case. It's kind of a symbol for, women's rights and women's freedoms and sort of, I guess, women largely, at least one segment of women. I know many women are disgusted by Roe versus Wade, but it has become almost symbolic. It's sort of identified very closely with Planned Parenthood and a lot of these big women's rights organizations. And so many people, anytime it's Roe versus Wade, it's sort of this assault on women, meaning that this is going to be a big deal. So the question then becomes, what is the Supreme Court going to do about this? And I want you to think about this in terms of political posturing, not even about the law, not even about abortion, not even about, any legal concerns you have about the structure of Roe versus Wade or about, the opinion on life at conception or any of that stuff. It's not even about that. It's about what the court is going to do based on the political posture. So let's think about this. If the Supreme Court came out today and overturned Roe versus Wade today, they're not going to do that today because this case is going to come up on the next cycle, it sounds like. If they did that today, guess what would happen? Right? You would see a ton of political pressure and a lot of momentum from the Democrats, and the court would almost certainly be packed because there would be almost no way to stop that enthusiasm for changing this case. But what happens if we fast forward to next year when we're in the second term? Maybe we don't hear a ruling or we get an outcome on this case until after the midterms. Well, what happens if the seats change? What happens if the Senate changes back to Republican control or the House changes back to Republican control? Well, then it's a lot more difficult for the threat of court packing to have any teeth because the Democrats are no longer in control. They can't do that. And of course, the Republicans are not going to allow that to happen. So we now sort of see how this can flesh itself out in terms of politics. If the Supreme Court comes back down and rules in favor of overturning Roe, well, maybe we get a lot more calls for court packing. If they don't, you're going to have a lot of people very disappointed that we have 6 conservative judges. We have an opportunity now to potentially readdress what many people consider to be a massive problem in our jurisprudence and our cultural society through the lens of Roe versus Wade. Well, Supreme Court's going to hear about it. They have on Monday accepted a Mississippi challenge to the abortion precedent set by Roe versus Wade. This comes over from the Washington Examiner. In an unsigned order, the court said it would hear the case, but limited its scope to the first question presented in the petition, which is whether, quote, all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. The court will not consider the other 2 questions, which related to the scrutiny of abortion restrictions. The court's acceptance of the case electrified the anti-abortion movement, with many leaders hoping it would signal the end of a decades-long battle to send the abortion question back to the individual states. The states should be allowed to craft laws that are in line with both public opinion on this issue as well as basic human compassion, instead of the extreme policy that Roe imposed, said Jeannie Mancini. In a petition, Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch asked the court to consider if the state's 2018 law banning abortions before 15 weeks is constitutional. So it sounds like that's what the law is, right? If there was a law in 2018 that banned abortions before 15 weeks, Fitch wrote that the court must resolve contradictions in its decisions over when viability begins. So they're asking the Supreme Court to weigh in on that. Now, that the issue that the court's going to be trying to unpack is, are all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions unconstitutional? So is it unconstitutional to say at 15 weeks, I know almost nothing about pregnancies, but at 15 weeks, you are absolutely not even remotely viable. Pretty sure about that one. That there's no way you can survive if you're a 15-week fetus. And so here they're saying that this would be banned before 15 weeks. All right. Whether that's constitutional or not. Well, we're going to see what the Supreme Court says about this. The case represents the latest challenge to the abortion precedent by Roe, reaffirmed in 1992 by the Casey decision. Last summer, the court weighed in on a major abortion case in Louisiana, where Roberts joined the court's liberal wing to deal a blow to anti-abortion activists. The addition of Amy Coney Barrett to the court gave the anti-abortion movement hope that cases such as the Mississippi might prove winnable. Both sides of the abortion debate after Barrett's confirmation ramped up their preparations for the possibility of a post-Roe future. The court wrestled behind the scenes for nearly a year before agreeing to hear arguments in the case. And so we'll see where that comes up in the court queue, the court docket. Let's take a look at some questions here from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. What's up? Sharon Quidney here. She says, well, what do you know? Wonders never cease. The Supremes, who were and remain worse than useless during the election debacle, actually upheld citizens' rights and the Constitution, and unanimously at that. That's right, Sharon. Sometimes they step up and we get some good news from them. Other times, not so much. Do you support, Davis Parks, do you support substantive due process? This has always bewildered me. Whether or not you like abortion, it's always boggled me that this isn't a violation of the 10th Amendment. It feels like telling abolitionist states that they have to honor a slave owner's right to property. I'll be keeping my fingers crossed that this means that the Casey precedents will be tossed and states will finally have their right to decide these controversial issues. So, you know, do you support substantive due process? I don't know how to even answer that question. I mean, it's such a huge topic that I really can't unpack all of that right now. My head is sort of spinning trying to think about how to even answer that question. But I think the bigger question is about sort of states' rights and about dealing with some of these cultural issues about whether or not we should set a standard. Look, regardless of what you think about the abortion issue, I agree that this is something that should be dealt with through the legislative branches. I would hope that most of us can agree about that. When we're talking about the courts sort of stepping into these cultural issues, I have a lot of issues with that. And this is really where Roe versus Wade is so tricky, right? It's not even necessarily from the legal people. Many of us are not even such a tricky topic. I got to be so careful with my words here. Many of us are questioning the mechanism by which Roe versus Wade was implemented. Okay, this was like the Supreme Court went in and passed a legislative bill, essentially. They wrote law, okay, which is not their function, regardless of what you think about abortion. Doesn't matter. You can say, you know, this is about anything. It's about widgets or it's about selling fruit on the side of the street, right? There are some things that a court of law is intending to do. Its functions are directly tied to the creation of its jurisdiction, of its power, of its authority through our Constitution. So when the court starts acting like Congress, when they start passing laws like a three-structure frame for abortions that has a first trimester, second trimester, third trimester framework, we're all going, what? Where the hell did that come from? Where in the Constitution did that say any of that? It comes from nowhere. So you're just manufacturing all of this stuff and then calling it, you know, due process. And it becomes problematic because that's not the court's function. That's the legislature's function. So if the individual legislatures from all the different states want to pass their own rules and pass their own laws, I'm okay with that. Okay, I've been very in favor of that. That this is one of the beautiful things of our country. We have 50 states. We have these little laboratories of democracy, as Justice O'Connor talked about, and that's a good thing. And people can pick up and go to where they want to go. And I really encourage that because we're seeing that happen right now. We're seeing this exodus from California over to Texas, over to Florida, over to Nashville, and Tennessee, and many other places. That's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing. I'd like to see more of that, not less. So great question, Davis Parks. Good. Thank you for that. We got one or a couple more over here from Pinky2 says, Rob, seems like such a roller coaster. Why can't we get a state constitutional amendment to solve this court packing and a few others like term limits? Solve it using the people to decide. SCOTUS is too political and politicians forget who voted them in. Yeah, so I'd be in favor of absolutely a convention of the states, certainly. When we were playing around and toying around with the digital Bill of Rights, which I still like that idea if we can ever get some momentum behind it, but if we could do something like that, if we could get a convention of the states, we could impose some term limits, we could do a lot of things very quickly that would, I think, rattle the power structure in Washington, which is really, I think, what most of us want. We're kind of tired of the same old ineffective garbage leadership that I've had most of my life. We have, and that is it for the questions. All of those came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Thank you so much for all of your support. We really, really appreciate it. All right, we got one more segment of the day The Marines, the Army, the CIA, everybody is going woke in the United States Armed Forces. We're talking today about the Space Force commander who was fired after criticizing Marxism and critical race theory. We're going to be talking about the Army. The U.S. Army is now focused on making sure that we all know how dangerous one of America's most severe enemies is. Of course, the worst enemy that we face right now, it's not, Al-Qaeda, it's not North Korea or the Russians or the Chinese. It is climate change, Mother Earth. She is coming after us hard, and the Army's got to gear up. They're going to get their CFL light bulbs and their solar panels, and they're going to go out there and save America one tree at a time. So we're going to go through a lot of this. Now, this is a trend that is taking place all over the country, and we're even seeing the Pentagon now saying that they are going to be starting to monitor all military personnel, their social media, to identify extremist content so that they can sort of unify and homogenize the entire military to make sure that they are in alignment with one political ideology that's in power right now. First story comes over from the Post-Millennial. Says the Space Force commander speaks out after being fired for warning against Marxism. He was on Sean Hannity last night, Monday night, to warn that critical race theory is creating unnecessary divisions inside the armed forces. He said, "Let me give you one example of what I saw in the past 10 months was when I was in command of a unit." He said, "I began noticing some time ago, and not just in the past few months, but over the past several years, an increasing relevance of what I saw was a Marxist ideology parading around by other names," Lieutenant Colonel Lohmeier said. The Secretary of the Department of Defense called for an extremism down day and issued a guidance memorandum to all service members in February. In the guidance memo, he basically gave an injunction to every service member, so an injunction is like an order, every service member to combat extremist ideologies within the force where they saw them, and take it upon ourselves to protect one another and to speak up and educate one another about extremist ideologies when we discovered them causing divisions within the force. He wrote Irresistible Revolution. We talked about that book yesterday. Sean Hannity went on to slam the military for teaching the Constitution and for teaching that the Constitution ratified and codified white supremacy, which was mentioned in his book, Irresistible Revolution. Hannity asked him if the U.S. military recognizes the incredible strides the U.S. has taken to form a more perfect union. He says, "I think it's recognized. I think one of the things that the Defense Department does very well is it makes it very clear that we've got zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind, based on race, sex, politics, or religion." But he made it exceedingly clear that during his time as commander, he had zero tolerance for political discrimination as well. I said, "I made it very clear to my own people in the light of the hyper-politicized environment since I've taken command, and I'm no longer in command, I will not tolerate any discrimination of any kind based on politics." There were videos being sent out to every base service member that we were asked to watch in preparation for our extremism down days and discussions on race, in which we were taught that the country was evil, that it was founded in 1619 and not 1776, and that whites are inherently evil. They're teaching this to the military. Oh my gosh, what is happening right now? We have the, if that's not bad for you, then we now know that the U.S. Army, America's lethal fighting force. And I have a lot of respect for the military. I never served. I got to imagine, I know a lot of people who did serve in the military. I got to imagine that they are just looking at this stuff and they are pulling their hairs. I have to guess. But maybe they don't want those people anymore. Maybe they want the cisgender Latina gal or the Magic the Gathering playing CIA agent. I have no idea. Maybe that's what they want. U.S. Army now is going to be taking on climate change as a serious threat to national security. Over from the Federalist, the U.S. Army announced it will begin prioritizing climate change. It's part of its ongoing strategic operations. Oh my gosh. Who's in charge of the military now? Is it Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Titled U.S. Army Addressing Climate Change Threats. The document classifies climate change as a serious threat to U.S. national security and defense objectives, while also detailing how the military agency intends to play a more active role in responding to climate-related issues moving forward. Quote from the memo, "To prepare for the challenges ahead, the Army will continue to identify and implement steps to enhance readiness and capability in the face of climate-related threats." That's good. Strong steward of the resources offered in a shared operational environment. The Army has a lot to be proud of, yet there's a lot of work to continue to operate efficiently across extreme weathers and climate conditions. As part of its response initiative, the agency intends to conduct in-depth assessments of likely climate change effects on the Army's worldwide missions, while also working to lead the way in technology for tactical vehicles. The response will include a focus on strategizing and planning to mitigate climate threats. What the hell are they going to do about this? The Army, the U.S. Army, what are they going to do? They drive tanks and they fly helicopters and aircraft carriers that carry huge pieces of metal all over the world. That's the point. It's to move forces around the planet. It's going to cause some carbon to come out. They've placed an emphasis on soldier resilience, energy reform, and capability enhancement. The push to incorporate a left-wing climate agenda under the guise of national security has been a longtime priority of President Joe. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin foreshadowed how the Defense Department will utilize the issue of climate change to reshape how the military operates. Everything is going to be reshaped under climate change, including the military, which is Elon going to be making some tanks and some aircraft carriers? We're going to have a Tesla aircraft carrier now. We are in the Department of Defense. We are committed to doing our part. We're going to increase the efficiency of our platform, whatever. These guys it's like a joke. We have the Pentagon now plans to monitor social media of military personnel for the extremist content. So this came over from The Intercept. Glenn Klippenstein wrote this. So if you are somebody who is in the armed services and you don't want to fight climate change and you get on Facebook and you post about it, well, guess what? Pentagon is now monitoring you for that. So they're going to see whether or not that's extremist conduct. If you write a book about Marxism or critical race theory, like the former Space Force commander, gone. If you're somebody who doesn't like climate change, gone. If you're somebody who maybe is not an ideological lefty, gone. We saw that. Libertarians, threats. So now they're going to be cracking down on this. They're going to be monitoring everything you say just to make sure that you're not a dangerous extremist. As part of the Biden administration's crackdown on domestic extremism, the Pentagon plans to launch a pilot program for screening social media content for extremist material, according to an internal Defense Department document that was provided to The Intercept. Extremism Steering Committee is being led by Bishop Garrison, a senior advisor of the Secretary of Defense, currently designing the social media screening pilot program, which will, quote, continuously monitor military personnel for concerning behaviors, according to a Pentagon briefing in late March. So I'd be very curious how this works, right? Are they just monitoring social media generally? Like, are they monitoring searches and trending hashtags and doing data searches to see whether, what pops up, analyzing Google Trends? We already know that they're plugged in with all these tech companies. So is that what they're doing? Or are they following people? Are they saying, hey, Rob, you're in the military now. We know you. We're going to identify all your social media posts. You got this Facebook address, this YouTube account, this Twitter profile, this Instagram. All that just goes right into a database, and they check that specifically. In other words, they are monitoring you directly. They're not monitoring extremist threats on the internet. They're monitoring you and you and you. Be curious to see how this is being structured. Although in the past the military has balked at surveilling service members for extremist political views due to the First Amendment protections, the pilot program will rely on private surveillance firm in order to circumvent First Amendment restrictions on government monitoring. Can you believe these guys? According to a senior Pentagon official. So the government can't monitor you because it's the government, right? They need warrants. They need, you've got First Amendment protections. You can speak your mind freely. They're not allowed to do that. That's okay. They're not going to do it. They're just going to hire a third party to do it. And they're going to navigate around the different constitutional protections that you have so that they can violate them. And this is what we see on a grand scale. We already know that they're doing this, right? All of the people who say that there is no problem with Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Google or any of these entities censoring your speech, they all say this. Oh, it's just a private company. They can do whatever the hell they want. Really? Even though they're undermining some of our fundamental civil liberties, our fundamental principles of the United States, like the freedom of speech that's embodied in the First Amendment. You're saying you're okay with that, with these other private companies like watering those things down? Would you be okay if other private companies, I don't know, reinstituted segregation again, like we had back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s? Would you be okay with that? Because those are also private restaurants and private auto shops and private drinking fountains. No, it's not okay. It's not okay when they do this stuff. And when we allow the government to use this private, BS escape valve, it's not okay. The Pentagon is now doing that with men and women in the armed services. And they probably have no idea. Though the firm has not yet been selected, the current frontrunner is Babel Street, a company that sells powerful surveillance tools, including social media monitoring software. Babel Street has drawn criticism for its practice of buying bulk cellular data, selling it to the federal national security agencies like the Secret Service. They rely on private companies to bypass the warrant requirements normally imposed on government bodies seeking to collect data. In November, Vice reported that the U.S. Military Special Operations Command used one of Babel Street's products, Locate X, to track the location of individuals for Special Forces operations. One method Babel controversially used was to purchase location data associated with the users of a popular Muslim prayer app. We have people praying, and we have the government interfering. Garrison and Babel Street, they didn't respond, of course. It is unclear as to what extent Congress is aware of the program, if at all. Why would they be aware of anything? When asked about the program, a spokesperson for Rep. Don Bacon, a member of the Armed Service Committee, said they were not aware of it. I have discussed this with our defense team, and as of right now, we have not heard anything from the DoD that would confirm the story, said Bacon. Senate Armed Service Committee did not immediately respond for a request for comment. In an email received after this article was originally published, spokesperson for the House Armed Services Committee provided the following. It says, the committee understands DoD is exploring a means of implementing social media screening. We anticipate any screening would be intended only as an additional means of vetting cleared individuals. Oh, okay, so that makes it okay. And those seeking to obtain a security clearance, not as a tool for ongoing surveillance of all men and women in uniform. Do you believe that? That said, Secretary Austin has been clear about his intentions and to understand what extent extremism exists in the force and its effect on good order and discipline. We look forward to hearing the results of the stand down and the department's plan to move forward. So they are endorsing the entire thing. Basically, they send this letter. Well, you know, we heard about that, but they're not doing the bad version. They're gonna, it's not for ongoing surveillance. It's just to make sure that they're good. And hey, and also we know this, by the way, anyways, Lloyd Austin told you he was going to do this. So, and we're looking forward to the results of this. Thanks for your inquiry. Next question. The Defense Department hinted at the program on April 9th on a press release about its Countering Extremism Working Group, which it says will make recommendations on incorporating machine learning and natural language processing into social media screening platforms, as well as ensure training addresses issues raised by commanders and supervisors on gray areas such as reading, following, and liking extremist material and content on social media forums and platforms. Pilot program is going to use keywords, going to identify potential extremists, though coming up with a list of terms without running afoul of speech protections has proven to be challenging. I wonder what those keywords will look like. I wonder if, you know, certain politicians are going to be on one list and other politicians are not. The Intercept previously noted that the military's Countering Extremism Working Group drafted a list of potential consultants that included anti-Muslim and Christian conservative groups. Using keywords to monitor social media isn't just an unnecessary privacy invasion. It will ensure that it is short-lived. It's a flawed strategy, said a retired FBI agent. It will undoubtedly produce a flood of false positives that will waste security resources, undermine morale, not going to identify anything. This is the tolerance for those that openly engage in racist behavior and discrimination. Last month, the White House rejected a proposal from the Department of Homeland Security to collect social media data from immigration applicants rather than relying on artificial intelligence or algorithms. They're basically going to say, just take reports of the racist misconduct. Trying to suss out extremists with an algorithm isn't likely to identify problem employees within the department. Look, I'm not even sure that it's the point of that. That they want to, it's about conditioning everybody who's already in there. If you're middle of the road, if you're not an extremist, if you're just somebody, I don't know about any of this stuff, or I'm not somebody who would jump out as in the extremist category, but maybe you're slightly conservative, you're slightly Republican. Now you're getting beat in the head with CRT and anti-extremist ideology. Pinky number 2 says, Rob, can we stop with the junk they want to keep our focus on and take on what is important? Geez, our government is no better than those bad popo groups I shall not name here. We have financial problems, food problems, and they want to go spend all of our money on climate change. I know. It's very important. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like we're constantly assaulted by the temperature, especially here in Arizona. It's coming to July, right? It's going to be like 115 degrees in Arizona in July. That threatens my personal national security because it's too hot. But you know how I solve that? Jump in the pool. Sharon Quidney says, this woke military is just another example of the communist takeover of this country. It's the same thing they did in Russia. Immediately rid the military of any elements who are not in alignment with the regime. 6 months ago, I would have said, that's crazy. Like, they would never do that. Like, they would never officially take steps to purge the military. And I just covered 3 stories today talking about it. No Doubt says, solar tanks that only fight on a sunny, happy days. Solar tanks. That's right. Solar tanks. Yeah. Solar tanks, Tesla's solar tanks that are, marching through the desert in the Sahara. And when it gets cloudy, your side loses. Actually, there's no battle that day because both sides have solar tanks. It's cloudy. Nobody just fights. We all just sit down and have a picnic together. Mestizo Quixote says, wouldn't it make sense to insulate the military from tumultuous social movements? One would think that the military has more important things to focus on. You would think that. I mean, I thought that for a long time. I thought that thankfully that the military was sort of the last bastion of independence, sort of removing themselves from the political BS that you and I engage in on a regular basis. They're supposed to be above that. It's supposed to be that they are in America's interests and the civilians duke it out amongst ourselves. Republicans think they have better ideas. Democrats think they have better ideas. Military says, I don't care. You people sort it out. We're going to go execute our assigned duties flawlessly, and we are going to go protect America domestically and abroad. And that's it. And if the Republicans come in and we're going to change things, whatever. We're going to continue to fight and win. We're going to solve America's problems. Now, it's not even about that. Now we're fighting climate change, critical race theory, and apparently it is being infested with Marxism, according to our former Space Force commander. So I'm not sure what the military is. I don't know. Edon Tess says, I'm with you. What exactly is the military supposed to do? Maybe it's just me. Maybe it is simple. Global warming. Buy less tanks, buy more boats. There you go. Hey, that's a good point, right? Maybe we need the military to buy a bunch of boats because I've been hearing for 10 years that we're not going to have coasts anymore, or we're going to have a lot more coasts internally in this country. But obviously that hasn't happened either. Al Gore said we had 10 years to solve this problem. I remember hearing that back when Inconvenient Truth came out. You know how I remember this? Rush Limbaugh put a counter on his website that said, we only have 10 years to live, because Al Gore said we only have 10 years to live. We got to fix this in 10 years. That was like 25 years ago. So it is an ongoing thing. It's hysterical that we're still talking about it, except it's kind of scary because now it's pernicious. It's getting into our military. Edon Tess says, buy more boats. So if the military then, if they're going to be solving climate change, we all need boats so that we don't fall and sink in the ocean. Leafy Bug is in the house, says, I hope military personnel who think all of this politicized nonsense are able to mouth the right words or hold their tongues at the right time and hang in there until the military refocuses on its core mission of winning wars. If they go, the military could go the way of schools, universities. This seems incredibly dangerous. I agree with you. I actually agree with you. I think this is a big concern because it's supposed to be something that is off limits. Both sides, all right, you guys, we want you to go kill people and break things. That's the purpose of it. And if we don't want that to be the purpose of it, that's fine. We can have that conversation and we can change that. We can say, well, we don't, maybe defund the military. We're going to be a peaceful nation now. We're going to send community response teams over to deal with armed conflict in the Middle East. We're going to send, AOC and Rashida Tlaib to go out there and have conversations with people. Look, if that's the policy and we want to make that change as a country, we can have that conversation. But that's not what the military is for currently, right? They're for destroying the enemy. And I think that maybe we should revisit that in light of this new administration's change. Is it really about climate change? Great questions coming in today. A lot of good topics. A lot of irritating conversation. Irritating topics today for me personally. Having trouble with my words. Getting ahead of myself. If you want to support the show, you can do that over at locals.com, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can download a lot of stuff over there. Free copy of my book, Beginning to Winning. Download the slides that we went through today. Download a copy of my impeachment party documents. Download a copy of my Existence Systems personal productivity tool, totally free over there. You can share links throughout the day and connect with great people. Also want to remind you, we have a monthly locals meetup. It's going to be taking place this Saturday. Oh my goodness, it's coming up very soon, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to have 1 hour Zoom meetup. So if you want to join and be a part of that, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I know that some people get a little bit anxious when we talk about Zoom and talking and connecting. If you want to keep your camera off, no problem at all. Even if you don't want to talk, no problem at all. If I'm on there by myself and everybody has their cameras off and their mics off, I'll just talk to myself for an hour because I'm probably going to be doing that anyways. We have another thing coming up in June, Saturday, June 12th at 12 to 2 p.m. Says here we're going to be doing law enforcement interaction training. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this one. So Saturday, June 12th, going to be about an hour and a half. We're going to have another 30 minutes or so for conversation. Another Zoom. Can also keep your cameras off if you want, but all free. All that's free if you are a supporter at locals.com. Watchingthewatchers.locals.com is the address. Lastly, before we get out of here, I'm a criminal defense lawyer here at the R&R Law Group. We're in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're very passionate about helping good people facing criminal charges to find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their lives. So if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who is facing DUI charges, domestic violence charges, felony charges, misdemeanor charges, traffic cases, anything and everything in between, we can help with that. We can help quash old warrants. We can clear up old records. We can help you restore your rights to vote, to possess a firearm, apply for federal benefits. There's a lot that we can do. And if you have an active case, we can really make sure that we can help represent you in a way that's going to get you the best possible outcome. There's a lot that goes into it. We offer free case evaluations. So if you want to come into our office, we'll have you sit down. You can meet with our team, grab a copy of my book, make sure you have a strategy before you leave our office. And if we can work together, great. But we just want to help. If we can just point you in the right direction, we'll do that. So if you do happen to know anybody in our state of Arizona that needs help, we would be honored and humbled if you sent them our way. It would really mean the world to us. We love what we do. We've got a great team of people here, and we're just looking forward to helping other good people who just need a little bit of support through this difficult time. So free case evaluations, phone number, website, everything you need is down in the description below. Also want to ask you to head on over to my second channel. If you would support us, that would mean the world to me as well. There's a link in the description below. Final reminder, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so there's not going to be a live show on this channel. There is going to be a premiere, which is kind of like a live, but it's a pre-recorded premiere. It plays at the same time for everybody at the same moment, starting tomorrow at 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern, over on channel number 2. So check that out. It is already public and posted and available if you're a subscriber over at Locals. So if you want to get into a deep dive, about an hour and 20 minutes on Wuhan, the lab escape theory versus the natural emergence theory, I do a deep dive on that. We go really, really deep into the Nicholas Wade article, and it's very, very illuminating. We actually go through 4 different factors that sort of help us decipher whether this came from a lab or whether this came from nature. So fun video, heavy lifting, some deep dive stuff over there. So definitely not for everybody, but go check that out. And again, I would appreciate the support. So that is it from me, my friends. I will not see you tomorrow, but you can see that premiere on my second channel. I will, in fact, though, see you on Wednesday at the same time, same place, same location, 4 p.m. Arizona, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. in Central, and 7 p.m. on that East Coast for that one Florida man. Everybody, thank you so much for being here with me today. I will see you back here on Thursday. Have a tremendous night. Bye-bye.